One time long ago, in a place not far from here, there was a pretty meadow on top of a bluff between the forest and the mountains near a nice little river that ran into a big river that ran into the ocean. The Indians called it an Indian name.
Mokpisa Achukma.
And for 100 years, they would gather there to trade skins and dried corn and pottery and leather goods with the other Indians. Until one day, a Frenchman came along and built a house and a barnyard and a store and named it La Berge de la Rivière, which meant the bank of the river. Other settlers renamed it Marquette's Bluff, which was the name of the Frenchman who traded in glass and copper and cloth and other things that were new and exciting that came from the ocean up the big river and up the small river to the meadow on the bluff between the forest and the mountain. It was a nice spot, and the sunsets were fantastic.
Ooh, wow.
The Frenchman built a dock and a pier and established a pretty good trade and raised a family and grew old and died. The Indians came and went with the times, and Marquette's Bluff grew a little here and a little there, while lots of English soldiers and French soldiers and Spanish soldiers took turns claiming it for kings and queens back in Europe, who spent most of their time going to big parties and having gout. It wasn't long after that the territory became a state, and the settlement of Marquette's Bluff became known as the town of Duncan Fork, after Mr. Duncan, who got the railroad across the river.
Duncan for president! Timbuktu Duncan 2! Speech!
Unfortunately, Mr. Duncan went on to help win the West and enlarge his own fortune. Duncan Fork, meanwhile, did what a lot of towns did back then. It boomed and prospered. Pretty soon, all the kids were going to school. There was a factory that made farm equipment, and before long, a new mill over here, a plant over there. And Duncan Fork was ready for silent movies and noisy ice cream parlors and streets that needed paving. Oh, it was nice in Duncan Fork in those days, just like always. You had the river and the woods and the mountains, a great place to live, to work, to play, and to raise a family. Everybody liked it that way, just like always. One day, there was a new hotel, a new airport, a hospital, and a new high school. Before you knew it, kids were coming back from the university to help Dad run the business, or to work in the mill, or teach in the high school, or to practice law. And people liked it that way, too, just like always. But the town wasn't by itself. All over the country, other towns had come along to add to the old ones that were already around. The country was growing, and fast. There were new people coming into Duncan Fork, and some of the old faces were leaving, for better jobs maybe, for more money, maybe just to try something new. Nobody thought very much about it at first. Things had always seemed to take care of themselves. But one day it was different. There were people looking for jobs and not finding them. A lot of kids who went off to the university had to look someplace else for the kind of careers they wanted. Duncan Fork had a problem.
And I think it's about time somebody in the mayor's office put the people first. The good people in Duncan Fork pay the lowest taxes of any city in the state, and that's the way it ought to stay. If I'm elected mayor, I promise to fight any tax increase, every tax increase, all increases, for as long as I'm in office.
Well, okay. But how much of a real advantage are the lowest taxes in the state? What do the people of Duncan Fork really save by not spending those few dollars? And what do they lose? Meanwhile, Tyson City just got an automotive plant that employs 600 people, about 100 of them ex-residents of Duncan Fork. The reason? Tyson City bought and prepared the kind of plant site that the company was in the market for. They had the dollars to do it with. Dollars that also provided better services, better recreation facilities, better schools, and cleaner streets. Things that Tyson City wanted.
I can't figure that plant setting up over in Tyson.
Tyson ain't got no history. They was just founded when Duncan Fork was already 100 years old.
We got some of the oldest places in the state, right here in Duncan. The old Lamont place was built before the Civil War. The old foundry's older than that.
Well, yeah, but the old Spanish well's older than the foundry. Foundry was English.
Old man Gaston told me it was French. French had all that land up there. Anyway, Tyson wants them, they can have them. We like things here in Duncan too much just the way they are. Don't we, Dan?
That's right.
The way it's always been.
The truth is, Duncan Fork, just like every other town, has never always been anything except changing. Its problems have changed too. They've gotten bigger. Inadequate zoning laws have made a few landowners richer at the expense of more rational and more broadly profitable development. Unplanned, haphazard, and random development has resulted in unsightly, unsafe, and unnecessary commercial strips fronting the highway into and out of town. Indifference about the future, especially among community leaders, is forfeiting Duncan Fork's influence over the changes that are affecting it. What real leadership there is never seems to get together. Different groups compete for dominance, fragmenting the best efforts of them all. Maybe worse yet, a creeping fear of the facts and refusal to admit real problems has held back productive, positive growth. So what's ahead? More change for sure. But what kind of change? The kind that adds benefits, that increases opportunities for individuals? Or the kind that slowly takes apart a community's assets and diminishes its future? Duncan Fork may have had some static days in the past, but it was changed by Tyson City. Our little town has always been changing, and you can see that it's going to change a lot more, whether its people take action or don't take action. Population about 8,000. A good place, clean air, good people, and a long history, and a pretty unappealing future. 2 years ago, the railroad company almost stopped service through here. And they would have if a nearby town hadn't grown as fast as it did. While that didn't bother some people, it was enough to wake up a few others. That and the fact that a number of stores had closed. A majority of the graduating classes were leaving for college and staying where the jobs were, or just to be leaving. Some of those who woke up got busy.
Well, everybody want to take a seat?
They knew that Duncan Fork was a good place. What they didn't realize was that property taxes were in bad need of reassessment, that the economic base was too small and weak to allow anything but poor quality services and facilities, that the city's leadership was divided, that retail stores were behind the times, that industry already there was closing down and moving out, that it would be very unlikely for any new industry to come in, that economic growth had stopped.
Okay, about this slide presentation.
You know, my son got a camera the other day for his birthday, and we take some pictures of this new courthouse job that we did, and take some pictures of the land that's west of town.
Yeah, that'd be good. How are you going to pay for all of this?
No, that's no problem.
We'll get the money from somebody. We'll worry about that problem when we...
But I think I can have this ready in about a week or two, and whenever anybody comes to town, we'll show them the great progress we have here.
Yeah.
I don't know. See you on that.
Ruby and I have this outstanding
Hey,
thing.
listen,
You can get something between an asphalt jungle
Margaret,
and
we
a
have
big
come up
place.
with this outstanding idea of a brochure to show out all of our good points.
That's a good idea.
Nowhere can you find any information on the historic background
Right.
of Duncan Fork.
And we thought we would make it real pretty. We would snap it up a little bit with a picture of the old Spanish well. And what was the other picture that you had about the
I like the pond by the wagon trail.
Yeah,
I
that's
can
Oh,
take
that'd be
those pictures
beautiful.
while I'm making the slide presentation.
Right.
all right.
Good.
You want to charge us?
You want to charge for the film?
Don't worry about it.
Well, then we'll have a brochure and we'll have a slideshow.
We can use this
The
brochure.
ladies' garden club.
But
But don't spend the money on the flowers so quick. I think you ought to save it until we get something really organized.
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. we got to have a piece of property to show a prospect. We don't have an industrial site.
But we need to keep it away from the residential area.
Yes, I agree.
get away
Well,
with
yeah,
that.
it doesn't matter. We get tax money.
Well, how about
Right.
old man
Well,
McAllister?
listen, we hadn't got much money to spend, so we need to get something that's not too expensive now.
Old man
Something
McAllister's
cheap.
want $500 or $600 for that land.
Oh.
No, he'd take $200 for
Yeah,
that
You
land.
think that's
No,
what's
Oh,
it's
he'll
like
never
this.
do that.
Oh,
But
I
it-
don't
it-
know,
it-
I don't know. Somebody else bound to have some more land around here. All
I've
this
got
rural land
300
we got.
acres, but mine's next to Tyson City.
Will you sell it?
Well,
I'd
we don't want
have
to get
have-
close to Tyson City now. We
No.
want to keep our park over our site over
They
here
might
close
try
to
take-
home.
yeah.
Besides,
That was just a start. For the first time, people had begun to see that things weren't just fine as always in Duncan Fork. After a few months of meeting over coffee, they got a small development group together. The goal, get an industry to locate. The objective, to make jobs. Well, it sounded simple enough, but the real work was just beginning. In 14 months, they looked at numerous potential land sites, talked with owners, and discovered that most people would rather hold their land than sell it. The problem was twofold. First, appraisals were so low that some landowners paid almost no tax on their property. Second, the development group had no clear-cut plan for obtaining the funds for purchase of land. They were shopping in the dark. At last, City Alderman McAllister told them he would sell 120 acres of his property for $700 an acre. Well, maybe $800 an acre. Well, if a really big industry wanted it, why not $1,000 an acre? Maybe even $1,500. Trouble was, the land wasn't drained well. Parts of it were underwater after a hard rain. It was located on the opposite side of town from rail and highway arteries. There was no real commitment to sell, and of course no real dollars in hand to buy anything with. But that didn't stop them. And so at last, Duncan Fork had brought a potential industrial prospect and a potential industrial site together. 120 acres of one-time pasture land west of the river, north of the railroad, and almost east of the old Foxfire Swamp. How's the water situation out this way? The prospect wanted to know. Don't have any right now, said Mr. Winkler, but the city could get a line out here within a year, maybe sooner. That's interesting, said the prospect. What about power lines, sewer lines, access to highway and rail? Well, said Mr. Winkler, rail's a problem, but we can get to work on the other stuff as soon as we can get the land bought. Oh, I see, said the prospect. Hey, let's grab some lunch, said the mayor.
Duncan Fork's got a lot to offer a company like yours.
We got the river, the mountain. We're not too big, not too little. Good schools, good churches, good people, good air, good everything.
And goodbye. Duncan Fork's development group spent a lot of time getting consideration of their town as a place for industry. They didn't succeed. You see, what this man wanted was a town ready for his needs. A site located on good land, near rail and highway transportation, with adequate sewer lines, water, and utilities at least planned. What he got, a site that was privately owned, highly negotiable, poorly drained, remote, well, in a word, worthless. Even if there had been a good site, there was little incentive for locating in a town whose appearance told a story of neglect. Duncan Fork obviously did have good people, but so did towns with better services, better facilities, and more aggressive leadership. There would have been other problems, too. Labor, the schools, recreation. Their brochure made Duncan Fork a third-rate historical attraction. No concern at all for a prospect. The slide presentation that might have been was really not an industrial presentation at all. Any industrial prospect is going to do a lot of homework before selecting a location. Before it makes contact with a community, it will study availability of raw materials and transportation in a number of areas in several states. From this, a few communities will be picked, say 5 or 6, and then is when the local groups get involved. It is strictly business. They're looking at the numbers, the bottom line, the potential for profit. Besides that, the livability and appearance of a community are factors in choosing a location. Are the services and facilities as good as they could be? Are assessments equal or fair? How do other aspects shape up? Things like zoning, water, sewer, utilities. What about residential areas and recreation? What's in it for the people that the company will bring in as well as for the plant itself? Among the most important building blocks of economic development, and Duncan Fork will have to know them, are industrial sites, labor supply, fiscal management, community development, and action groups. It is from these 5 basics that any industrialist desiring to locate or expand will weigh the assets and liabilities of all other specifics that relate to a particular area. And we can evaluate the potential of Duncan Fork by looking at each one. Industrial sites. There aren't any. Only a spoken indication by an owner that he will sell land that's poorly drained and badly located. What's the need here? How could it be met? Labor supply? Good people who want to work, but an industrial prospect wants to know a lot more. Hard data on labor resources. That is, how many workers live within commuting distance? What are their skills and wage rates? What job training programs and facilities are available? The numbers of those not currently in the labor force, unemployed, and how many now working that want better jobs? What needs doing here? How could the quality and quantity of labor be improved? Community development. The people of Duncan Fork love their town, maybe too much to see its shortcomings. Frankly, it can't compete with many other locations. What's to be done about the appearance? About lagging services, water and sewage systems? About zoning and housing? One answer might be in the fiscal management. What are the available sources of revenues, and how are they being spent? Higher taxes alone are not a solution. Are the monies available being spent with a plan of development in mind? Do arbitrary decisions scatter the resources? Industrial prospects are very much attracted to communities with a knowledge of their resources, a good decision-making process, and a sound business system. So, what steps could be taken to improve fiscal responsibility? Here's where the buck really stops. Duncan Fork has a small action group, but it's shopping in the dark. Nobody's thought yet about involving leaders or residents out in the county, or combining efforts with nearby communities for regional development projects, or expanding the industry already present, or getting help from state agencies, federal agencies such as Economic Development Administration, power companies, or railroads. All of this involves more than taking interest. It requires generating interest, better promotional programs, more information to people, identifying, encouraging, and helping potential new business in the town or area to get going. It demands accurate knowledge of needs and plans adequate to meet them. And if our little town is going to realize progress, that's where it will have to go from here. A long time ago, there were Indians hunting this land and using the river for their commerce. A few miles downstream, it runs into a larger river, which runs into the sea. And just over there was once a trading post established by the Frenchmen who did business with the Indians. The trading post became a settlement. The settlement became a town. And the town got a railroad. And it grew and became the city of Duncan Fork. 6 years ago, the people of Duncan Fork woke up to the fact that their community was changing, whether or not they wanted it to. And to make that change positive instead of negative, they'd have to get busy. And that's what they did. One result, an industrial park, a site equipped and located to attract and serve new industry. But it's really a part of a larger story that began right here. You see, it was obvious that Duncan Fork was going to thrive or decay in a larger context that included other communities and the county as a whole. So the leaders of the town's action group rolled up their sleeves and went to work. It was slow at first, often frustrating, but after a year's effort, they got enough commitments from county elected officials and leaders from other nearby communities to form a regional development organization. By working with Tyson City, other communities in the county, they could put together a lot of resources and offer an industrial prospect more. New industries within commuting distances would still strengthen Duncan Fork's economy. With money pledged by businessmen, by manufacturers, and by concerned citizens, the group then got to work on a step-by-step plan for positive growth. It took a lot of digging, but surveys paid off in hard statistical data. How many high school graduates were going to college and not coming back? How many weren't going to college, but were leaving to work elsewhere? How many were unemployed? How many were not working, but would work if the right kind of jobs were available? They calculated the impact of 100 new jobs for Duncan Fork. An annual payroll of nearly $1 million. The creation of 60 industry-related or support service jobs for another $500,000. New housing and construction. New loans. 33 acres of residential land. 80 new cars and the accessories, maintenance, fuel, and the insurance that goes with them. Cost factors, too. The necessities for adding sewage treatment capability. Solid waste disposal. An addition in water supply of 200,000 gallons. Good, solid data for serious planning. They began an active communications effort to inform the public and to educate voters on matters of critical importance. The payoff that could result from equalizing assessments. The necessity for public acquisition of industrial sites and for bond issues to improve services and facilities. The need for a vocational technical center, for new or improved roads, for the right kind of planning. The group took inventory of existing industry. A look around the community and county to see where the jobs already were and where potential existed for immediate expansion. One of the first efforts was helping young Bob Lamb build his weekly into a daily newspaper. With more staff, Bob told them, he could develop enough advertising revenue in a bigger circulation area to make the move. The bank saw the potential too. The paper became a valuable means of creating community interest and support.
The inventory paid off in other expansions. In 4 years, 280 additional jobs were created by helping existing manufacturers to expand. It was help that took the form of increased services. More water pressure, for example. Additional treatment capability. In one instance, a new access road to a major highway over land bought by the city for that purpose. Things that would not only open possibilities for homegrown industries, but would attract new ones looking for a place to locate.
The money for all this was derived from a better economic base. The city and county together began a more rational approach to fiscal management and were able to obtain additional dollars from federal grant programs. It wasn't long before the development group got serious about industrial sites. They studied aerial photographs and topographical maps from the U.S. Geological Survey, and with other data, selected several sites worth buying and improving. With assistance from state government, developers quickly saw the long-term potential in a well-planned and developed site. The one selected was almost adjacent to the rail line. It would be a natural. It was obvious, too, that old Duncan Field, already nearly obsolete, couldn't handle increased use or traffic. Working with developers from Tyson City and other communities, engineers selected an optimal location for a new regional airport. From this evolved a plan for industrial development which could one day extend from the rail line in Duncan Fork across level land near the regional airport to the interstate highway in Tyson City. A plan for controlled growth that would offer investors choice options for a long time to come.
Storefronts were improved. There were new signs, windows, a renewed sense of pride. Many businesses started the practice of joint advertising. Shopping hours were better tailored to working hours. Parking spaces were provided. Better stock, better displays, better hours, and better profits. Cable television came to town. Another service to the people and revenue for the city.
All of which began to attract the attention of investors and industrialists. This time, there was a well-planned site waiting for them. A site picked for the right reasons and purchased at a reasonable price. Information packages included the essentials and nothing more. Data on the site, specifying each of its features, data on the community, presenting a factual resume of its qualities, services, facilities, and characteristics. Statistics on labor in the workforce, plus the training available, things the industrialist had to know, including problems in the area, before deciding to invest money and staff in a new location.
Duncan Fork and Duncan County were growing together after 6 years, and it was making sense. Managing and controlling this growth involved a lot of hard work and headaches, and sometimes meant enduring a few failures, a loss here and there, but their results were pretty obviously a big step up from the past. It had been worth every setback, every frustration.
Well, it's a nice enough story. The truth is, there isn't any Duncan Fork. There never was. It's just a place in the imagination where people who were losing learned how to win. Learned that you don't stay the same. That change is better if it's coordinated. That growing intelligently is not only possible, it's profitable, it's fun, and very meaningful to those who come after you. No, there's no Duncan Fork. Only a lot of communities that have its problems, that have its potential for success. Look around you. You may be living there.